Hey friends! My name is Desiree, aka Mama Friendly. I do all sorts of videos on my channel. Cooking videos, vlogs, hauls, Disney content, VLOGMAS, a little bit of everything. So if any of that sounds like fun to you, I hope you'll subscribe and join me on my YouTube adventure. Today I am recording the conclusion of my 12 Days of Cookies series. Throughout VLOGMAS, I've released 12 different cookie recipes, and I've left what I feel is the most Christmassy for last. I didn't grow up eating these, but whenever you look up any sort of a list of like Christmas cookie inspiration or whatever, this is always at the top of the list. So I'm going to be trying my hand at gluten-free and dairy-free Snickerdoodles. And I'm also going to be explaining how to make them vegan as well, if that's something that you need to consider. The recipe seems super simple. The ingredients are also very simple, condensed. The whole thing should take less than 20 minutes. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I think it's a great way to end the 12 Days of Cookies series, because after all this baking, something simple sounds great. So without any further ado, let me show you the ingredients that I'm working with today. We're gonna need 1 cup of unsalted butter, softened. I always use salted when I bake, and I find that it doesn't really make a huge difference. It's whatever you have on hand, right? So 1 cup would equal this 1 brick of Miyoko's plant-based butter. Otherwise, you need 2 sticks or 8 ounces of whatever butter you're choosing to use. 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. 2 large eggs. If you want a vegan option, you can use Bob's Red Mill gluten-free egg replacer, or you can make flax eggs. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. 3 cups of gluten-free all-purpose flour with xanthan gum. This is the preferred brand for me. I always use Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1. You can use whatever you have on hand. If you don't care to make it gluten-free, you could just use regular, all-purpose flour. So here's where things get tricky-ish, but only, because we're giving options, right? So it calls for 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar and a teaspoon of baking soda. However, if you don't have cream of tartar, because I don't and I wasn't about to buy some just for this recipe, what you can do instead is omit the baking soda altogether. And instead of using cream of tartar, just use 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So rather than 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar and 1 teaspoon of baking soda, I'm just going to use 2 teaspoons of baking powder. If you have the cream of tartar on hand, by all means. And lastly, we need a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Once our dough is prepared, I'm going to want to roll it in a sugar cinnamon mixture before baking. So for that, you're going to need another 1/4 cup of the granulated sugar plus 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. Now, for sake of ease, I'm going to use my hand mixer today. And I'm also going to go ahead and preheat my oven right now to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, because this cookie dough does not need to stand in the refrigerator or chill before you bake it. So we're going to go directly from the bowl to the pan to the oven. So as with most cookie recipes, we're going to start with creaming our butter and sugar together. So we're putting in 1 cup of our butter into our mixing bowl, along with our 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. Here we go. So now I'm going to use my hand mixer to cream these together until it is light and fluffy. I want to make sure to note, in case I didn't mention it yet, the butter that I'm using is softened, and all that means is that 2 or 3 hours before I started baking, I brought the butter out of the refrigerator and just set it on the counter and forgot it there. So you don't need to do anything. In fact, I would advise you not to try to speed that up with the microwave or anything, because then what you're going to do is melt your butter, and that's going to mess with the texture of your finished product. So just make sure, even though the recipe itself is very fast, make sure you plan ahead a little bit so you can leave your butter out to soften for a couple hours before you begin to bake. Now that this is creamed together, I'm going to go ahead and add in my 2 eggs and my vanilla extract, and I'm going to cream these together until everything is smooth. You guys know I never measure my vanilla, I just kind of eyeball it. As I always say, vanilla is to baking as garlic is to cooking. You just got to feel it. Okay, that's looking great to me. This is the time where if you were using your cream of tartar and your baking soda, you would do 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar and 1 of baking soda. I'm going to be using baking powder in place of the 2, so I am adding in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. We're going to put in our salt next, and we're going to mix that until it's combined. So the next thing we want to do is add in our flour. So that's 3 cups of your flour of choice, and again I'm using 1-to-1 gluten-free flour here. They advise you to add in half and mix it in, and then add in the other half until a dough forms. I'm assuming that that's so that you don't overwhelm the wet ingredients, but also so that you don't get a big poof cloud of flour into the air when you begin to mix. So that sounds good to me. I can do that. Open a new bag because you guys know I always have extra flour on standby. With the amount of baking I do, you have to. Okay, start with that, and we'll put in the rest once that's combined. Officially, we have a cookie dough. That's it right there. And this is a very simple, very basic cookie dough up until this point because we haven't really added any extras in terms of flavoring. So if you wanted to, you could just use this as a base cookie recipe and add whatever mix-ins you like, whether that's the cinnamon we're about to use, chocolate chips, M&Ms, candy cane pieces, whatever. This would be a great starting point for any cookie recipe. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take a small bowl like this one, and we're going to add in our 1/4 cup of granulated sugar and 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. And again, I'm going to just kind of eyeball this. I feel like the ratio is more important than the amount itself. Either way, the amount it called for, we're probably going to have some left over. So no big deal. Yeah, that looks good to me. I'm going to mix this up a little bit to integrate it. And this is where our Snickerdoodle flavor is going to come from. So rather than dump this into the dough, if I were dumping it into the dough, I would have been more careful about measuring. We're going to take little scoops of our cookie dough and roll it around in here before we put it on our pan to bake. Speaking of which, I've got my cookie sheet right here. I've got some parchment paper over it for easier cleanup. I've got my handy dandy cookie scoop that you guys have come to know and love throughout this series. I'm going to have it linked down below in case you're looking for one for yourself. But I'm just going to basically use it to help me measure. And then this little ball of dough is going to go right into our cinnamon and sugar. So it gets a nice little coating like that. I'm going to put it right on the pan, and I'm going to flatten it just a bit. And I just realized that you guys couldn't see that, but there it is. There's our first cookie. So I'm going to do that to the rest of them. I'm going to leave them about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of space in between. My aim is always to get 12 cookies onto the sheet pan. And then we're going to bake them in our 350-degree oven. I'm going to do 10 to 12 minutes because I want a crispier cookie. If you want a softer cookie, you could check them at 8 minutes and see how they look. If you are using egg replacer, you are going to want to bake for the 12 full minutes to make sure that they come out right. Just watch your oven. Every oven is different, and so you want to make sure that they are kind of browned on the outside and still soft in the middle, but not obviously raw. Remember, when you bring them out and let them cool on the rack, they're going to continue to cook, so you don't want them to look done in the oven because that means they're going to be overdone when you're finished. Flattening them, by the way, keeps them from puffing up in the middle, but if you want a fluffier cookie, just skip the flattening step. I prefer a crispier cookie that's got a fluffy, doughy center, so I will not be skipping that step. But I'm just going to keep on scooping, rolling, and flattening until I've got my full pan, and then I'm going to bake these. My oven tends to need a little more time. It tends to err on the longer side of baking instructions, so I think I am going to give it 12 minutes before I check on it. Again, every oven is different. Hopefully you know yours. And if you and your oven aren't friends yet, then just make sure you start checking them at the 8-minute mark so that you can pull your cookies out when you think they're looking good. It has been 12 minutes. These smell so heavenly. They did spread some, but I guess I left just enough room because they didn't run together, so that's great. They are feeling nice and done, but not overly done. When I touch them, they kind of sink in the middle a little bit, and that's just where I like them because that means that they're going to be not raw, but they're also not going to be like crispy throughout, and that's, you know, that's my preference. This recipe is going to give me 3 full dozen of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let these cool a little bit so that I can move them safely without like them falling apart. Maybe 10 minutes or so. And then I'm going to go and start baking off the next, subsequent batches. But I want to make sure to give you guys a taste test before we wrap up. So as soon as these are cool enough to move off of the parchment, we will come back and do that. Alright pals, we have a finished product. You see it very easily lifts up from the pan. That's the inside, looking nice. It feels like it's going to be nice and crunchy on the outside, nice and fluffy on the inside. So let's give it a taste. You know what? I get it. I understand why people like these so much. The cookie itself is sweet but very simple, so it really gives the cinnamon a chance to shine. And just overall, it's not a very frilly cookie, right? Like there's not a lot to it. But that just tells you that everything about it needs to be perfect because there's really no place to hide. And this is a really, really, I dare say, perfect cookie. Yeah, I like that a lot. I fully see that being part of our holiday cookie rotation from now on. Alright pals, so there's my first ever Snickerdoodles. If they're your first ever too, let me know in the comments if you try the recipe and you like it or not. Let me know that in the comments too. But I've really had a great time sharing all these cookies with you guys for Vlogmas. I hope you've been following along. I put out a brand new video every single day this month from the 1st to the 25th. And about half of those were cookie recipes like I said earlier. So if you need some more holiday cookie inspo, there's still some time. Go check out the playlist. They're going to be in my description box. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed this series. Make sure that you're subscribed and that you've clicked that notification bell so you don't miss anything coming up in the new year. And we will chat again really, really soon. Bye!